This is Rummy's Corner. On February 11th, 1990, at the Tokyo Dome in Tokyo, Japan, James Buster Douglas defeated Iron Mike Tyson to become the new, undisputed WBC, WBA, IBF heavyweight champion of the world. It was the biggest upset in the history of prize fighting and arguably the biggest upset in all of professional sports. Douglas never had a performance remotely approaching that one before or after, but on that one night in Tokyo, James Buster Douglas was nothing short of brilliant. So how good was Tokyo Douglas? There are basically two main schools of thought. On one side, you have those who believe that Tokyo Douglas was a head-to-head nightmare for any heavyweight who ever laced them up. On the other side, there are those who believe Tokyo Douglas exposed the fact that Mike Tyson was never all that great to begin with. In order to address the question, how good was Tokyo Douglas? It largely depends on one's overall views of Mike Tyson. The two most pressing questions pertaining to Iron Mike are number one, how good was prime Mike Tyson? And number two, how good was Mike Tyson when he faced Tokyo Douglas? When it comes to evaluating the career of Mike Tyson, you again have two basic schools of thought. On one extreme, there are those who believe that Mike Tyson at his best was one of the greatest head-to-head heavyweights of all time. On the opposite extreme, you have those who believe that Mike Tyson dominated over a weak era and that he was never anything special. Those are the two extreme opposing viewpoints, and a lot of gray area exists here. Tyson's biggest detractors are very critical of the competition he faced during his championship reign. His critics say Tyson never beat any all-time great heavyweights in their prime, Tyson never overcame adversity, the 1980s era was weak, and that Tyson folded whenever things weren't going his way. Tyson's biggest supporters tend to believe that during his prime fighting years, he was a tremendous force who could have potentially beaten any heavyweight champion in the rich history of the division. And these people also tend to believe that Tyson was nearly unbeatable when he was still working with trainer Kevin Rooney. Earlier this year, back in June, when Andy Ruiz Jr. scored his tremendous upset victory against Anthony Joshua, fans were making a lot of comparisons with other big upsets in heavyweight history. So naturally, comparisons were being made between Ruiz Jr.'s upset victory and how it compared with that of Tokyo Douglas. Amazingly, I actually saw some fans even claiming that Ruiz scored the bigger upset. Holy shit. I mean, Ruiz over Joshua was a big upset to be sure. I myself was mighty surprised and mighty impressed by the tremendous effort from Andy Ruiz Jr. Indeed, I was impressed by the heart and determination exhibited by Joshua as well, even in defeat. But in no way, shape, or form does this upset remotely compare to the magnitude of what Tokyo Douglas accomplished. Joshua never had that same aura of invincibility. It wasn't just that Tyson was beating every worthwhile challenge available, it was the way he was usually beating them with such ferociousness that captured the imagination of the boxing public. The current lot of heavyweight champions, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, Andy Ruiz Jr., and even Anthony Joshua, they're all talented boxers. And hopefully as fans, we will get to see them prove who among them is truly the best of this era. That's something that still needs to be determined, and it might even wind up being a guy outside of those four. But with those guys, they're all talented, they've all made their marks as standouts in this era, but at the same time, these guys all have their fair share of flaws to go along with all that talent. In that sense, it wasn't all that surprising to see Joshua lose. And it won't be all that surprising if and when Fury and Wilder ultimately lose, or if when Ruiz Jr. loses again. With late 80s Mike Tyson, things were so completely different. Tyson's aura of invincibility was unlike anything I've personally witnessed since. By the time Tyson entered the Douglas bout, he had already been viewed by many as the best heavyweight champion for more than 3 years, and he ultimately proved he was the best. After winning the WBC belt from Berbick, he soon unified this with the WBA belt when he defeated James Smith, and he ultimately added the IBF belt when he defeated Tony Tucker. Tyson had unified all 3 major belts of his day. Tyson also went on to defeat lineal heavyweight champion Michael Spinks in an absolutely menacing display of power and precision. He was truly the undisputed heavyweight champion in every sense. The idea that Tyson could lose was so far outside the realm of perception that it was literally almost inconceivable. The only heavyweight who was expected to act as a potential test for Tyson at that time was Evander Holyfield, but those that genuinely believed Holyfield would defeat Tyson were few and far between. Iron Mike Tyson was the baddest man on the planet. So how good was Prime Tyson? I personally think he was pretty damn good, and I'm one of those who definitely believes he would represent a head-to-head nightmare for any heavyweight in history. What about the claims of his detractors? The first claim states that Mike Tyson never beat any all-time great heavyweights in their prime. Is it true? Sure, you can make the case that it's true, but by that same token, it's pretty easy to dissect any boxer's resume in order to downplay one's achievements and greatness. I see some Floyd and Pacquiao fans trying to do this to each other all the time to this very day, where you get Floyd fans trying to belittle Pacquiao's greatness, and you get Pacquiao fans trying to diminish Floyd's greatness. And at the end of the day, you wind up with a lot of bickering that misses the greater point. Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr. are both all-time greats. Tyson may not have technically defeated any all-time great heavyweights in their prime. Sure, Larry Holmes was old and past his best, and Michael Spinks did his best work south of heavyweight. So what? How is that Mike's fault? Or put differently, what all-time great heavyweights were around and prime during Tyson's championship reign? By the standard of his detractors, there were none. Look, the only thing we can ask of any champion from any era is to consistently defend against the top available competition. Tyson did that. Mike Tyson defeated every worthwhile challenger available during his championship reign, and he was set to face Holyfield. Simply put, this type of criticism can be applied to any past great. He never beat anyone good in their prime. That doesn't mean this type of criticism isn't completely without merit, but in the case of Tyson, he beat everyone worth beating during his reign up until he met Tokyo Douglas. The next claim from Tyson detractors is that he never overcame adversity, and we're going to come back to that one. The third claim is that the 1980s was a weak era. That may be true. I definitely don't think that the 1980s was the strongest era, and it certainly wasn't as strong as what we had throughout most of the 1970s and the 1990s. At the same time, I definitely don't think that the 1980s was the weakest era either. If you look through all of the eras in heavyweight history on a decade-by-decade basis, I'd say the 1980s rank somewhere in the middle in terms of being a strong era. Either way, this type of criticism still falls short when it comes to the fact that the only thing we can ask of any champion is to consistently face his best available challengers. And again, Tyson did this. The last claim from Tyson detractors is basically that Tyson lost whenever things weren't going his way, and that he could be beaten by any heavyweight who stood up to him and wasn't intimidated by him. That claim, plain and simple, is total bullshit. And I think this ties in with the idea that Tyson never overcame adversity. Tyson had plenty of fights where he had difficulties and things weren't always going his way. James Tillis gave Tyson some problems in Tyson's first 10-round fight a few months before he became champion. James Smith was able to frustrate Tyson and largely neutralize his offense, despite mounting little offense of his own. Pinklin Thomas had some spots of success against Tyson. Tony Tucker was able to largely nullify Tyson's offense while having some nice moments where things seemed to be going his way. And even Larry Holmes, the Easton assassin, had the right idea against the prime version of Tyson. The idea that Tyson folded whenever things weren't going his way is simply a falsehood. Circling back to the other claim from Tyson's supporters, who think he was nearly invincible during his time with Kevin Rooney, to reiterate what I already said, I believe Tyson is a head-to-head nightmare for any heavyweight at any time in history. So in that sense, I agree with the greater point here, but I don't think Kevin Rooney had any magical powers over Tyson. I just think that the split represented the point in time where Tyson was no longer fully dedicated to his craft. The last fight where Tyson was trained by Rooney was the victory against Michael Spinks in June 1988. Jay Bright and Aaron Snowell took over after Tyson split with Rooney, and Tyson had 2 bouts in 1989. One was a 5th-round TKO against Frank Bruno, and the other was a 1st-round TKO against Carl Williams. In these 2 bouts, it was pretty obvious that Tyson was no longer doing a lot of the little things that helped make him so successful in terms of bobbing and weaving, head movement, upper body movement, utilizing his jab to work his way inside, working the free hand whenever he was tied up, and using his quick feet to constantly bait and switch where he'd set traps and create favorable punching angles. None of these things had the same type of fluidity they once had. So in many ways, the split with Rooney is a tangible point in time where I think Tyson was no longer mentally fully dedicated in his preparations like he once was. Tyson still knew what he needed to do to give himself the best chance to win, but I think he started cutting a lot of corners in his training. And on top of everything going on in his life outside the ring at that time, I think the way Tyson made things look so easy in that spectacular year he had in 1988, the brilliant 4th-round stoppage against a game and clever Larry Holmes, the brutal 2nd-round victory against Tony Tubbs, and the absolute 1st-round destruction of lineal champion Michael Spinks. By that point, I think Tyson figured why train for 12 hard rounds when his power was blasting these guys out early. Tyson wasn't in top form when he faced Bruno and Williams, but it didn't matter on those nights. So the question of how good was Tyson when he fought Douglas, mentally, I don't think Tyson ever had his head fully in the game after parting ways with Rooney. This largely reminds me of the situation with Riddick Big Daddy Bo. He trained hard, and when he achieved his dream and reached the pinnacle when he himself defeated Evander Holyfield to become the undisputed heavyweight world champion, he never had that same desire again. Bo was never fully committed mentally after he became champion. With Tyson, it wasn't so sudden. Tyson remained highly dedicated to his craft, and being the youngest heavyweight champion in history, Tyson was still physically in or very near his peak when he faced Douglas. But mentally, I think Tyson was no longer dialed in with that same type of determination, that same hunger. So to answer the question, I don't think Tyson was in his absolute prime when he faced Douglas, because I don't believe he was fully invested mentally in his preparations. But at the end of the day, that's nobody's fault but Tyson's. And regardless of him being slightly past prime, he was still a tremendous force, in or very near his physical prime, with that mind-boggling aura of invincibility that came with the territory of being the baddest man on the planet. So even with Tyson no longer at his absolute greatest, he was still damn good and a major force to be reckoned with. At the time of the fight, Douglas was ranked number 2 by the IBF, number 3 by the WBC, and number 4 by the WBA. The number 1 rated contender for all 3 sanctioning bodies was Evander Holyfield, and he was next in line for a chance against Tyson. In fact, Tyson and Holyfield were scheduled to fight on June 18th of that year, and Douglas was widely viewed as nothing more than a mere tune-up fight. In his only previous shot at a world title, Douglas was making a good account of himself against Tony Tucker for the vacant IBF strap, But in round 10, Tucker tagged him with a sequence of unanswered shots, and referee Mills Lane waved it off. That was Buster's defining moment in his career up to that point. Tyson started the Douglas fight in familiar form, and right from the onset, Douglas seemed to have a lot of bounce in his step. Buster was being elusive, and he was showing a willingness to fight with Tyson. Before long, Douglas was finding a rhythm with his jab, and he was doing a good job keeping Tyson off balance. Douglas was jabbing well on the outside and effectively tying Tyson up on the inside. Douglas built off of this, and he was soon finding the mark with right hands and firing off some nice crisp combinations. This trend continued throughout the early rounds. Douglas was out-throwing, out-landing, and out-boxing Iron Mike. Douglas was snapping off his jab with pinpoint precision, and he was frequently catching Tyson on the way in. It was absolutely brilliant execution from Douglas, as he was doing all of the little things he needed to do when he needed to do them in order to best neutralize Tyson's tactics. It's as if Buster Douglas took every aspect of those who had spots of success against Mike. Quick Tillis, Bone Crusher Smith, Tony Tucker, and even Larry Holmes, the Easton Assassin. Douglas incorporated all of these elements, and he was blending them to near perfection. Throughout the early rounds, despite the one-sided affair, the expectation of most observers watching was that Tyson would ultimately catch him sooner or later. In round 6, Tyson began landing some of his trademark power shots, but Douglas was still controlling the action and winning the battle of the distance, whether it was from the outside, on the inside, or anywhere transitioning in between. But Tyson never stopped trying. That's one thing that is often forgotten when people discuss this bout. Tyson wasn't winning many rounds, and he wasn't especially sharp, but he was using every bag of tricks he had in order to try and disrupt Douglas. And Buster almost always had an answer. And despite being badly outclassed across most of the first 8 rounds, Tyson was still hanging in there, absorbing a beating, and trying to find that one big opening he could exploit. Towards the end of round 8, Tyson found a home for a mean uppercut. Tyson soon followed up and unleashed another vicious uppercut that sent Douglas down. Douglas made it to his feet at the referee's count of 9, and the round was over. Forgetting all of the unfounded controversy surrounding the alleged long count, this would go on to be known as the defining moment of the fight. And that was actually the general expectation for those watching live. Except those watching live were fully expecting Iron Mike Tyson to follow up, cool as an assassin, where he would emerge victorious in his most difficult fight to date in the lead up to a would-be mega-bout showdown with Evander Real Deal Holyfield. Tyson naturally went after Douglas early in round 9, but Douglas suddenly went on the attack himself, and he immediately seized command of the momentum. Douglas was firing away at Tyson, and Iron Mike appeared stunned. Douglas attacked ferociously, and Tyson bravely battled as he endured a great deal of punishment as the 9th closed out. Douglas landed a booming uppercut in round 10 that was quickly followed by a furious finishing effort. Tyson was down, and he looked badly dazed and confused as he was grabbing for his mouthpiece. Mike slowly rose to his feet, but by then he had just been counted out. The fight was over. It was a 10th round knockout for Buster Douglas in what to this day is arguably the greatest upset in the history of professional sports. Buster Douglas had just become the new, undisputed, unified WBC, WBA, IBF heavyweight champion of the world. The moment where Tyson reaches for his mouthpiece might well be the most iconic moment in the upset. Hell, it's among the most iconic moments in boxing history. But the real defining moment in that fight for me was when Tokyo Douglas viciously retaliated against Tyson in round 9. Because if he didn't do that then and there, perhaps we would have seen Tyson versus Holyfield 6 years earlier than we got it. It was a perfect storm scenario for Tokyo Douglas, where his mental determination going into the contest against a man who is arguably the most feared in the rich history of boxing, his determination was the stuff of legends that night. Buster always had the talent, but he was never fully invested mentally until that one night when he was up against the ultimate challenge. No doubt the passing of his mother 20 days prior to the fight acted as a brilliant source of inspiration for Douglas, but that's a moment that very easily could have broken him, and instead, it ultimately helped define his boxing career in an epic moment of triumph. In my opinion, Tyson's harshest detractors and some other neutral observers too, they believe that Douglas exposed the fact that Tyson was never anything special, and I think that does a great disservice to both Douglas and Tyson for their tremendous efforts on that fateful night in Tokyo. So how good was Tokyo Douglas? How would Tokyo Douglas have performed against past heavyweight greats like Muhammad Ali, or the Brown Bomber, or Big George Foreman, or the Easton Assassin, or Lennox Lewis, or any other past heavyweight great? It's impossible to know for sure, but based on his exceptional performance against 23-year-old Iron Mike Tyson, where he exhibited unbelievable determination, stellar execution, a tremendous ring IQ, and the heart and mental fortitude to overcome a brutal late-round knockdown at the hands of Mike, personally, I believe Tokyo Douglas from that night would have been a tough fight for any heavyweight who ever competed. I'm not saying he'd beat them all, and I'm not even necessarily saying he'd be competitive with them all. It's certainly possible someone like George Foreman could have overpowered him early, or that someone like Larry Holmes would have all the necessary tools and resourcefulness to outscrap Douglas. But the only thing I can say for sure is that I wouldn't count Tokyo Douglas out against any of them. Any of them. I wouldn't count Tokyo Douglas out against Ali. I wouldn't count Tokyo Douglas out against Foreman. I wouldn't count him out against anyone, including Mike Tyson from 2 years earlier. One thing I've learned after years of being a boxing fan is that greatness sometimes manifests in different ways and varying capacities. Buster Douglas may not be remembered as an all-time great heavyweight, but on that one fateful night in Tokyo, he truly was greatness personified. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Corner.